All right, guys. So it's interesting. There is definitely something happening in the culture. Of course, we know this. I guess there's always things happening in the culture. I want to talk about the interview between Theo Von and Tomi Lahren, or Tomi Lahren. So, Theo Von is a comedian, and he has a podcast called This Past Weekend, and he had on a girl named Tomi Lahren. She is a blonde-haired, maybe blue-eyed, not too sure actually, and she is a political commentator. So I guess mostly you could say she's a political commentator, maybe also cultural commentator, but mostly political. And she has been mostly mostly identified as being right wing, and a lot of people would describe her. Some people would describe her as far right. I actually don't know enough about her to describe her that way. I've just seen her clips. Her clips used to go viral on Facebook when she was, I don't think she was ever on Fox. I think she was on The Blaze, which is owned by Glenn Beck, who is a weirdo. And she used to have these clips where I guess she would go out on a rant and the clips would go viral, and she would, she would just stir up a lot of shit. And whether or not she's as informed or knows as much as she claims, it's one thing, but she was good at getting attention. And in this day and age, everything is about attention. The world is about attention. So, this interview is, in my opinion, very interesting, not just for the content, but also mostly just the fact that it exists. So Theo Von is coming up in the world of comedy. I think he is really funny. I have not seen a lot of his stand-up because everybody's stand-up nowadays is behind a paywall. Now, as a little tangent here, I am wondering if that's going to end up hurting people in the long run, because there's a lot of people who don't have Netflix. And I think a lot of the comedians are getting a lot of their fans from podcasts more so than Netflix, but they're all selling all of their comedy to Netflix. So, I don't know if that's going to end up hurting them in the end or not, but it's funny. My favorite comedians, I've never actually seen any of their recent stand-up because it's all behind Netflix paywalls. So anyway, that's another thing. But Theo Von has a podcast. He's a hilarious guest as well. So whenever people have Theo Von on as a guest, whether it be, Joe Rogan or, I don't know. There's a lot of people that have had him on. Oh yeah, The Fighter and the Kid, Andrew Santino, all those. When they have Theo Von on, it's always a good time. It's always a fun show. So I like to listen to his podcast. Now, his podcast is different than many other people's in that when a lot of times he's not that funny on his own podcast. He talks about a lot of issues that are important to him. They could be, a lot of it is him struggling with his own issues and kind of putting it as a call out there for other people to not be afraid to confront their problems, to confront their issues. So he talks about porn addiction, he talks about drug addiction, alcohol addiction. These are all things that he's dealt with and or is dealing with currently. And actually, listening to him is when I first started thinking about the whole porn addiction situation. So it's good. It's a good podcast. So the reason I think, let me continue a little bit more about Theo. So Theo is from Louisiana, and he is not conservative per se, but it's so funny, he's not a radical lefty. So basically, he is much more agreeable. You can listen to him, his perspective on things. He doesn't just, it's very interesting. So I have a tendency to get, I get pissed off at listening to some of my favorite entertainers, comedians, podcasters, when they just malign everyone that voted for Trump, right? Or they malign everybody who's like a Trump supporter, or they malign everybody who's not on board with climate change or something, when they just broad brush all these people. Now, don't worry. I mean, I get it. They are people too. We're all allowed to speak in generalities. But Theo Von doesn't do that with at least people on the right. He does not come out and say, oh yeah, I support Trump and I hate Hillary. He doesn't do that shit. But he just doesn't, he seems to come from a very humble place. So when he talks about politics or when he talks about people, he just doesn't go in for the kill. He doesn't just say, oh, those people are idiots because they voted for Hillary, or they're idiots for voting for Trump. He talks about having compassion and thinking about the people that voted for these, this person or that person. And I really appreciate that. As somebody, it's funny, I have never considered myself a staunch Trump supporter ever. But I support many things that he does. Like I've talked about before, we are living in the age where there is no such thing as nuance. So people cannot understand that position a lot of times, that I could say that, hey, there's a lot of things I don't agree with from Trump, but there are also many things I do. And so it's nice for me to hear a comedian that is gaining a lot of fame and popularity come out and be like, yeah, there's people across this country that are good people. They're hardworking people. They're down-to-earth people. They're the people that make the country run. They're the small business owners. They're the farmers. They're the ranchers. They're the plumbers, the electricians, the workers, the people working at Walmart. These are the people that a lot of these people voted for Trump. Of course, there's a lot of people that didn't, that are in that category. But anyway, so Theo Von identifies a lot with these types of people, with the blue collar, working class, salt of the earth kind of people. And so I enjoy listening to his perspective a lot of times on culture or what he thinks about people are saying about politics. He doesn't talk about politics himself really, but just kind of talks about his general feeling of what people are doing with politics. Like, what are people saying about other people who voted for this person or that person? So in this interview, it's very interesting because Tomi Lahren is a very controversial, polarizing figure. And the fact that he has her on is, in my opinion, it demonstrates, one, that he has some testicular fortitude. I think that's awesome. I also think that this is a sign that more and more people are feeling against the wall. And when I mean that, I mean in the entertainment industry. So yesterday, Ricky Gervais came out and said, blasted Hollywood for basically living in their coastal ivory towers, for not being in touch with the regular average person. I love that, my redundant. I'm so fucking redundant. With the regular average person. So he blasted the Hollywood elites for being out of touch with Americans. And it's funny because, then the Hollywood, apparently people came up and started doing exactly what he told them not to do, which was not to tell Americans how to run their lives. But anyway, so this is what Ricky Gervais did. Now, remember, before that, there was Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle came out a few months ago in his special and just was saying everything he wasn't supposed to say about trans people and LGBTQ and everything. And I think there was another one. I can't remember who it was. I don't know. Bill Burr is always pretty much just said whatever the fuck he wanted. So there's that. But there are more and more people, mostly comedians. Basically, what I think we're seeing is a rise of the non-leftists. That's the best way to put it. It's the rise of the non-woke, the rise of the non-super woke, the hyper woke. Because these are just, people, like I've said before, previously, everyone was in the same reality, right? Everyone was in the same world. We kind of agreed like, okay, we all like living in America. America has problems. What's the best way to solve those problems? But now we live in a world where there's two realities in America. One is that America has always been a shithole and is a racist, dysfunctional shithole that has never done anything right, and that we need to tear down all of society totally down to the ground and rebuild into a some kind of 1984 dystopia. And then there are everybody else. The majority of people are like, hey, yeah, okay, there's some issues. We got some issues. Yes, we've had race problems in the past. Are those completely gone? Probably not, right? But it's like the majority of people are trying to just work and survive and get by. And you have the hyper woke people living in another universe who are telling everyone else who is just trying to survive that no, you must bend down and kowtow to the needs of the people that want to destroy society because they view this society as purely evil merely by its existence. So what I think we're seeing here coming from the comedic sector of entertainment is a pushback. And it's a pushback saying, no. We have gone too far down this rabbit hole, so we're going to come back a little bit. Let's pause here for some sponsors, and I'll be right back. So in my true regular fashion, I haven't totally finished listening to the interview, but I've listened to a lot of it, most of it, and it's good. So obviously some things I want to talk a little bit about Tomi Lahren for a second is she's definitely one of those, somebody mentioned in Theo Von's comment section of the video that like these hyper political types, they're just like, they're not fun, like they just always seem turned on 100 miles an hour, whatever. And I totally see that. Whenever you listen to her in the interview, and if you've listened to her political stuff, it's very tough sometimes because it's almost as though she cannot turn off the political filter. This is actually something I worry about myself. So I consider myself a very multidimensional person. I don't like to focus in on politics. I love learning about, world culture, languages, martial arts, fitness. Like there's a whole world of things that I love doing, learning about, engaging in. And, politics, it's important, but it's not the most important. And so when I hear things, when I listen to people like a Tomi Lahren, in an interview, you see her, she's kind of turned up. She always seems kind of tense, always seems kind of on top of her shit. And I don't mean that in a negative, well, yeah, I guess what I mean is, some people just seem like they're always ready for a fight. And that's kind of how she comes off in the interview, even though she's very kind to Theo Von. She doesn't like go after him or anything. But also that's because Theo Von isn't he's not conflicting with her either. So the interview is, I think, pretty good if you want to learn more about Tomi Lahren. You'll kind of get a better understanding of where she's from. I didn't know she was from the Midwest. I think it was South Dakota. And they talk about Hollywood. And Theo Von brings up a good point. He talked about how he doesn't understand why the people in Hollywood, why they disregard so many of their own viewers, because it just doesn't seem to make sense with the money. And I agree with him. And I think so many other people have been thinking about this as well. Like, why would LA, why would Hollywood and New York, why did the coastal elites shit on everybody when that is their market? Like their market is the people that they're shitting on. Like, why are they doing it? And I'll tell you what I think a big part of it is because the media is so controlled by the left wing, and it wasn't always as radical as it is now, but because it is controlled by the left wing, they know that people in the Midwest and the South will watch whatever is on TV. So they'll watch the shows, they'll watch the dramas, and but in the past, because there was no choice, right? When you watched cable, when you watched TV, you didn't really have a choice about what was on, and if conservatives didn't own it, then there just wasn't options. This is probably why talk radio became so popular in the 90s, right? Everyone talked about the rise of Rush Limbaugh and talk radio. You had Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Michael Savage. These are pivotal figures in people, in at least the conservatives fighting back against the liberal media establishment. Because these people, of course, you have one news network, Fox News, which is non-leftist, but you have the rise of talk radio. And this is probably a huge, huge factor in people being able to even tolerate some of the left-wing shit in the media. Maybe not. I'm not sure if it helped people tolerate. But what I want to get to is really this is why the cable outlets and Hollywood are so threatened by the rise of YouTube. And this is why they have taken control of YouTube to abolish right-wing conservative voices. So I do not listen to Alex Jones. I have listened to him in the past, which is why I do not listen to him now. Some of the things he has said have turned out to be true. Some of the things he said have turned out to be false. Regardless of that, he is somewhat entertaining. And he was doing extremely well on YouTube. So he's non-lefty. He was cut off. Lots of people have been losing their accounts on YouTube. Lots of people have been shadow banned. We've seen the adpocalypse multiple times now. Steven Crowder has been on the front lines of the free speech censorship wars on the internet. And it's because the coastal elites had so much control over the media that now that they have been challenged effectively by the internet, that's why they are going after it so hard and trying to abolish it. Because they can't have that. The competition is just too fierce. And I get it, right? If I had control like that, there's no way I would want to relinquish that control to people making videos on the internet with a fraction of my budget. And it's, because like people like Steven Crowder or even Ben Shapiro, The Daily Wire, and many more, whatever you want to listen to on YouTube, you can build an audience with a fraction of the cost. And these people have been, like a Mike Cernovich type, these people have influence that is beyond what they could have ever done in the past. And it is coming up against and directly threatening the hegemony from the liberal coastal elites that control Hollywood and control, MSNBC, CNN, NBC. And so they have to fight against it. Now, I also want to... that's what Theo Vaughn was talking about, how they could get away with that when it hurts their business. Well, in the past, they could get away with it. But that's why they're all getting so upset now with the internet, because the liberal media establishment, there's no way that they could fight back against the internet without taking over the internet. So in the past, they could force feed whatever they wanted programming-wise down the throats of Midwesterners and Southerners because we had no other choice. But now, since people have a choice, the fight is on. So before I go, I want to talk for a second about Tomi Lahren and her abortion thing. I had never really heard her full defense of her stance when she talked about abortion. So I am not pro-abortion. I have a very nuanced take on abortion. And actually, it's funny, Tomi Lahren basically has said the same thing that I was thinking. She said, she got fired from the Blaze because of her abortion comments. And what she talked about was, she was like, look, I am not pro-abortion. What she was saying is, because she is a small government conservative, she doesn't believe that the government should be regulating abortion. She doesn't believe that it will make anything safer, and she doesn't believe it will help the pro-life movement to make it necessarily illegal. So I agree with this to an extent. And I know I'm a guy, so many people would be like, oh, what you say doesn't matter anyway. But my situation on abortion is very much in that same camp. After dating a doctor, my view on abortion changed. in the sense that, yes, I totally understand the moral case against abortion, and I would morally say this should not be done in most circumstances. The problem with certain regulations, or with certain kinds of regulations on abortion, right, is, and I'm not saying there should be zero, but I think you need to be very careful with this area, is that by regulating it too much, then there are going to be cases that have to be dealt with. And the more regulation you have, the more danger you could put legally on women who actually need it, and doctors and hospitals as well. So that is one of the biggest issues there that I see. Like I said, I dated a doctor, and she was one of those, she tended to just kind of like argue for the sake of argument, but she did bring up a good point that it does put doctors at legal risk if, with over-regulation of abortion. And I do agree. I think this should be more of a cultural issue. I would love to see this as a situation where it's like, look, legally you can get one, but it's very, very frowned upon. You shouldn't be going out into the streets and saying, yes, I got an abortion, and it should never be a form of birth control, right? It should be more of a form of like, there's going to be serious complications with this pregnancy, or I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not going to get into all that now. I just think culturally it should be less acceptable, and I think legally it should be less regulated, if that makes sense. But that's what I think. Anyway, if you want more of my ideas, my commentary, my perspective, check out my website, tstuch.com, tstuch.com. You can go to my YouTube channel, Taylor Stutch. I will be uploading vlogs as I am now living in Taiwan, so you will see my adventures through Asia. What else? Email me at tayradio1@gmail.com, T-A-Y, radio1@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter, tstutch1. Okay, guys, thank you very much. Have a fantastic day. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. I am not as tired today. This adventure to Taiwan, to Asia, it takes getting used to. You can't just move to a whole 14-hour time zone difference, 12-hour time zone difference, 14-hour, yeah, 14 hours difference, and just expect that you're going to be the same. So I'm getting slowly back on track. But what am I going to talk about in this episode today? In this episode, I'm going to discuss with you the interview between Tomi Lahren and Theo Von. Actually, Theo Von had Tomi Lahren on his podcast. I think this is so interesting. I also think that this is the beginning of something bigger. I think we are in the middle of a pushback against the super hyper woke in Hollywood. So, take a listen. I think you will enjoy. No, in fact, I know you will enjoy. You can email me at tayradio1@gmail.com. Go to my website and read my blog at tstutch.com. Go to my YouTube and subscribe. It's been a little slow, but I plan to start uploading vlogs at Taylor Stutch. And you can follow me on Twitter at tstutch1. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the episode.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast?